Welcome everyone to this eclipse bonus video. Well, I should say the nodes changing signs video. So in the month of January 2022, the nodes are going to shift from Gemini and Sagittarius into Taurus and Scorpio. So the nodes of the moon do work in reverse. Another thing I wanted to mention about the nodes is that they do have 18-month cycles that repeat every 9 years or so. So we're going to have, one of the signature features of 2022 is going to be the eclipses that occur in the signs of Taurus and Scorpio. So those are going to peak in May, October, November, and again in the sort of spring in the Northern Hemisphere and the autumn here in the South. So that's going to be the eclipse theme for the next 18 months or so. We did have an introductory eclipse to this cycle back in November of 2021. So how you could perhaps conceptualize this nodal period is the eclipse in November is a bit like reading a foreword to a book. So I've just started a new book this weekend and there was quite a long foreword and an introduction, and haven't even got to the actual book itself yet. And so last month, it is last month because I'm recording this in December, but in November, we had that eclipse in Scorpio, the full moon eclipse. So this is a little bit like the introduction or the foreword. It doesn't really tell you a great deal, but it kind of sets up the storyline for what's to come. Now, in January, we're going to have those nodes change signs. So you're getting into the chapters of the book, if you like. And so the next 18 months is the book. And just like a book or a series on Netflix, whatever analogy works for you, some chapters are going to be very storytelling, and they're really going to dictate the idea of where the plot is going, and others don't. And so generally speaking, it's the eclipse seasons that will sort of bring a peak of events in the storyline, which obviously is going to be sort of May this year, October, November, and then sort of around that Easter period next year. So I guess that's one way to conceptualize this nodal shift change. Sorry, I feel like I've got cat hair on me. So yeah, is the idea that it's an ongoing storyline with some chapters that are going to be more prominent than others. So another way to think about this is the last time that the eclipses took place in these signs. So the last time was between September 2012 and February 2014. That time it was the North Node in Scorpio and the South Node was in Taurus. So like a reversal of signs of what we have in these particular chapters. The time before that, where it repeated in the same fashion, was April 2003 and December 2004. So if you can perhaps start to cast your mind between, the periods, those dates of those periods, you might start to think, to feel some, oh, well, that period was this and that period was that. But one thing's for certain, there are house axes that were activated during that time, despite the fact that the nodes were in the opposite signs last time and then the same signs before that. So roughly every sort of 9-ish years, you will get eclipses activating the same pair of houses. So I sort of think that, for by and large, that's one way that we can look at them. Obviously, the North Node is in Taurus, the South is in Scorpio, and that will bring its own type of themes. We have a co-presence with Uranus, which is also going to make this eclipse, more Taurus dominant, if you like, this eclipse story. Same as in 2012, that was, I think maybe Saturn went into Scorpio with the North Node around August or October, I think, that year. So there's obviously other transits involved that will amplify or impact what happens with the eclipses. But overall, start thinking about the houses. So what I want to do with you now is start to look at the houses. So a lot of people will sort of think, you know, in a more evolutionary astrology way, or even just the way that I first learned about the nodes was that the North Node was attributes you were trying to work towards or to embody in your life. And the attributes of the South Node was something to maybe let go of or leave behind, because those were done in a past life, or you know, they were already done. Okay, so you had to sort of move towards that opposite end of the spectrum in order to find some type of happiness, contentment, or fulfillment. I don't actually subscribe to that model, looking at the nodes, though that said, I mean, it still has a place and a space. And, you know, in some respects, I still have a certain resonation of how those sort of concepts work in my own birth chart. But, you know, it's not really descriptive to just kind of go the North Node is good and the South Node is bad. It's always about context, the same with any thing to do with astrology. You have to contextualize it. So obviously the North Node in you know, in a pattern that might involve abundance or joy or happiness or some really great cycles, of course, you know, we obviously want to amplify or bring more of that stuff in. But you wouldn't want the North Node to be implicated with a diagnosis that could be potentially terminal or very tricky to treat. So, you know, obviously, if you have the North Node going through an area of your chart that may not be ideal, that could also be a problem. Now, the South Node can also be really good in some situations where you do want to, if you want to cultivate a more spiritual life, or you want to you know, really sort of hone in on one particular area and eliminate distractions, you know, that can be really prominent or helpful for you. So let's just say, for example, you're doing a PhD and your South Node's going through the 9th house. That might be really helpful for you because you can just really hone in on that focus. So what I want to do is take the nodes throughout the houses. So I'm just going to look at them as a pair of house axes. So rather than going through each of the 12 signs, because you know, the nodes are sort of a bit like the dragon's head, or the North Node is what we ingest. Like if we look at food, it's like what comes into our body. And then the South Node is like a purification or an elimination point. Obviously, whatever we ingest, we have to excrete out. So there is you can't have one without the other. And that's why the nodes are always in that position of opposition, because they show the rising tides of life. And then, you know, they are the moon's lunar nodes, and the moon in the order of the cosmos is the sort of like everything happens under the moon, and it's the closest body to us. And in the order of the cosmos, we're living in this sublunary realm, in the material realm, within our bodies, right? So, you know, we all have rises and falls in fortune, and in ancient astrology the moon was considered to be fortune, more so not necessarily about money, but it could also be just general good luck and health and wealth and success in life, right? So we have rising tides of fortune and favor. We also have, you know, rising tides of waistlines and all sorts of things. So, you know, being in this material body and in this material realm, we are all subject to the ebbs and the flows, and, you know, the good and the bad, and the light and the dark, and, you know, everything that goes on in between. So when we look at eclipses, it is really important, maybe not just to focus on the fact that the North Node is in Taurus, but, you know, a virtue of being the North Node in Taurus, the South Node has to be in Scorpio. So, okay, a little bit of a preamble there. Let's get moving into looking at the houses. So I'm going to start with the house pairing of Taurus and Scorpio. So if you are either Taurus rising or even Scorpio rising, the next 18 months are all about relationships for you. So before I get too much into that, I think it's really important also to point out that the North Node in Taurus, the South Node in Scorpio, the signs of Taurus and Scorpio are fixed and they are yin signs. So it really does speak to the more inner stuff, the stuff that we don't like to be upended or disheveled or not have stability around. So an idea of that, let's just take Taurus. Taurus is the exaltation of the moon, okay? And, when we think about the moon, and Taurus, there's things such as food, money, and shelter, like those bare necessities of our physical survival, are things that we don't like to have in a state of flux or turbulence or uncertainty. With the Scorpio end of the spectrum, we're looking at more of Mars's domain. So the emotional Marsy water sign. So we're talking about themes of emotions, of trust, of loyalty. So if we're in a relationship with someone, we don't want to feel that the capacity to have trust in the person or their ability to be loyal is not there. Like those are the things that we really depend on when we're in partnership. So I think this Venus-Mars dynamic is also something that is, with Taurus, Scorpio eclipses or nodes, and of course the next nodal cycle, which is Aries, Libra, the next sort of 3 years, the eclipses are going to have this like Mars-Venus dynamic involved. So I do feel that it does bring certain relationship themes, regardless of where the nodes are occurring in life, in your chart. So when I think about Taurus and Scorpio, also think about that dynamic or that duality between what is simple, Taurus, just the simple things, just the pleasant, like a cow in the fields, just chewing the cud without a care in the world, lush green pastures, maybe beautiful sunshine, gentle rain, very fecund and calm, serene and peaceful, versus Scorpio, where this could be a very still lake, but this undercurrent of turbulence, or you never know what is really happening underneath a still lake, right? So we've got this dynamic between complexity and simplicity occurring with these nodes. So obviously Taurus, Scorpio risings are going to have relationship themes come up, particularly maybe like of a financial nature, the bare necessities of life, food, bare necessities, not only of life, but of also partnership. The resources that are involved, who's giving, who's getting, what's the balance there. It could also be, involving the emotional resources, the trust and the stability and the security involved in that. It also could obviously bring in some financial situations as well, like whether that partnership is business or it's more of an intimate or a personal setting. These resources can also be linked to not only the financial, but also the energetic and the emotional. With the Scorpio South Node as well, it's almost like themes of power is going to come into play. What's going on behind the scenes, despite what seems like maybe simple and beautiful on the outset. So just as an example, I'm Gemini rising and I've just had the North Node in my own sign and the South Node in my 7th house. And so I'm not saying this is going to be the case for all Taurus risings, but the idea here is that there is going to be maybe a change in the nature of relationships. There's going to be maybe with that Mars ruled 7th house, some confrontations, getting to the core of the matter and prompting those Taurus risings to go a little bit deeper, to really get that vulnerability, to really, get that sort of deep craving needs met. Whereas on the flip side with Scorpio rising, sometimes it's just like letting that stuff go and just enjoy the simplicity for what is, as opposed to what the complexity that you're used to, or the drama or the intensity, letting that go and just like smell the roses along the way. So it's this simplicity, complexity dynamic is going to come through in partnerships. So now looking at our next pair of houses, I'm going to push this forward until we're going to push those nodes into the 2nd and the 8th house. So this is going to relate to Aries and Libra. So if you're either an Aries rising or a Libra rising, the nodes are going to impact the 8th and the 2nd. So again, we're talking more money stuff, more resources stuff. You know, at the North Node in the 2nd, you might notice that there is more income, okay, more income coming through. But on the flip side, it could also mean more expenses or more taxes or what have you. If you're on the other end of the spectrum and it's the South Node going through the 2nd, it can feel like sometimes the money is thin on the ground, or there's a lack, or maybe you just don't want to spend as much money. Even though the lack could be apparent, but it also, with the North Node in the 8th, it could be because you want to pay down debt, or maybe put more money in investing or savings and things like that as well. So there can be that sort of changes in the fortunes and the flux of money and resources, which can sometimes be a little bit destabilizing, but also, you know, can really, you know, the nodes can sort of speak to kind of like karmic implications. When the nodes are in Cancer, Capricorn, you know, I had a lot of growth financially, which also impacted some of, you know, the taxation side of things. So it is that sort of balance. Also changes around some of my, you know, the way I earned income, and less, you know, more me earning the income as opposed to, you know, arrangements I had with other people in a professional situation. So, you know, be mindful that there is going to be maybe some power dynamics, or even just changes in the way that you earn, spend, and save, and the like. But it can be, you know, a really great time to sort of get clear about what's really important to you, not only on the financial, but also the emotional and energetic exchanges. It's a very powerful transit, and empowering too. So if you are a Pisces or a Virgo rising, it is the 3rd and 9th houses that are going to be active for you. So this is the study, the travel, the writing, the publishing, the academic pursuits. What I also really love about this particular cycle for you, it's about committing yourself to something, or figuring out like what you're wanting to invest in terms of spirituality, in terms of some type of divination or divine practice, coming down to the idea of routines that have meaning. Okay, so there may be some shifts or changes around your philosophy, your outlook on life, or maybe your ideologies, maybe some philosophical things, religious perhaps. Maybe you want to go back and finish that PhD or write that book. Okay, and so some kind of journey of self-discovery. There's this feeling here that the world has potential to open up for you, but it's almost like you kind of got to double down on what it is that you want. This might bring some conviction, or deciding, you know, what it is that you really believe in as well. And your daily routines and rituals being in alignment with whatever you're trying to pursue externally or spiritually as well. This is one thing I see with a lot of students or enthusiasts of astrology, is they're so in on the technical and wanting to learn about astrology and how all these moving planets impact their lives. I mean, that's the whole purpose of the golden circle, right? But there's also developing the relationship with these planetary deities, you know, or the gods. And I think that's such a fundamental part of your journey of astrology, is being available and open for those lines of communication that transcend the mental realm. Okay. And so when we have the eclipses in the houses of divinity and divination, these can really open up for you. So when the nodes were last in Taurus and Scorpio, obviously it wasn't my third and ninth house, but that was, you know, I had other activations, but I discovered astrology then. Okay. So, well, took my first official class during that time. Okay, so let's have a look at our next series. So now we're going to be looking at Aquarius and Leo. So if you have Leo or Aquarius rising, obviously these nodes are going to be impacting what you do out in the world, praxis, and then what you do in your hiding place or the hidden place, you know, at home. So themes of work-life balance, you know, maybe there's some tension or struggle or difficulty in the home life, but the outer life or the public life is just booming. Okay. You know, there's opportunities and changes, and the reverse can be true as well. So the key thing here is, you know, saying no to something so you can say yes to something else, but also figuring out what that looks like. You know, that's the really tricky part. There's this feeling like, you know, in one area there may be a lot of stability and growth and fecundness, but in the other area maybe some chaos or challenge or difficulty. So usually, like if the work life and the professional life is going great guns, there may be some difficulty at home. How do you spend more time in the home with the people that you love there, you know, assuming that they are there? Conversely, if everything's fine and dandy on the home front, but, you know, the outer world may be taking a back seat to that. So there's this kind of dynamic between rest, action and rest. And that's the sort of interplay of 2022. So the eclipses are just really going to activate more of the Saturn Uranus, which is already fixed. So if you do rather have a fixed sign rising, the eclipses are just going to really add another level of well, maybe like challenge, but also opportunity. You know, eclipses do have the potential to really fast forward events. You know, those kind of plans or goals, you sort of go, oh yeah, I wouldn't really be in a position to do that, you know, this year. Don't be surprised if, you know, it turns out that maybe you actually are. What I love about Cancer and Capricorn axis for this eclipse season is that, this eclipse cycle, is that you have the fortunate houses activated. So whether you have Cancer rising or Capricorn rising, you've got the house of Jupiter, the 11th house, and the house of Venus, the 5th house, activated. Okay, so this is going to bring like some beautiful connections through with maybe friendship or benefactors. You know, if we remember primary motion in astrology, it's the planets that are rising up to support your work in the world. So this could be your friendships, your social connections, your industry peers. So you might find that your social life or your creative life is what really kind of blossoms during these eclipse cycles. It could also be a creative pursuit. Those creative pursuits might involve children, a hobby, a personal outlet, or something like that. You know, it's a very fecund area that's being activated too. So this might bring, you know, a pregnancy or the birthing of something that you have been incubating for a period of time. Now, you know, I feel that like with these eclipses, there's going to be a change in your fortune. Okay. that might mean socially, creatively, romantically. Like it is a year when you can, the more you kind of put yourself out there a little bit, whether that's, on a dating app, or whether that's, saying, yes, I will go out for those after work drinks, or I'll go to that astrology conference, or whatever it is. Where if you put yourself in the right company, that's where, that luck, or that, those beneficiaries and good fortune can come through for you. So it can be this really, anything can happen, but there is a sense of, good things. We've got the 5th and the 11th houses, and they're, they are the most fortunate of the birth chart. So finally, we take a look at Gemini, or Sagittarius and Gemini, as our next, actually, hang on, I'll just fast forward that a day because we've got back into the other nodal cycle. Okay, so Taurus and Scorpio is going to be activating the unfortunate houses. So unlike Cancer, Capricorn, 5th and 11th, Gemini or Sagittarius rising has the unfortunate houses active. Now, this combined can really, it's like there's hard work to be done. And maybe this push or pull between being contemplative, private, or wanting to escape at some level, but there's work to be done, or problems to be dealt with, or issues to be solved. The 12th house being active, there is this kind of, there may be a stuckness, and that stuckness may be something you can't put your finger on. I'm a Gemini rising, so I have, Uranus there in the 12th house. I also have personal planets in the 12th house. So, I know in my own life, there is a feeling of stuckness. I can't quite put my finger on it. And even if I do try and put my finger on that, I'm like, well, I could do that, but would that solve the issue? Would that change anything? Or is it just one of those, what we'd say kind of like, excuse the French, but same shit, different bucket, and that's the sort of the dynamic in there. It's like, or do I just double down and keep on working and ignore the existential crisis of the 12th, right? So when these houses get active, it can be like this feeling of sacrifice or surrender, or constantly giving, outputting, but maybe not even feeling that reward or recognition. I mean, you will have, Jupiter angular for the most part of this year. So all's not it won't all be bad. But there is this feeling of, having to give up something. This might be a compromise or even a sacrifice, depending on the nature of what you're giving up or having to surrender or figure out. Okay. So this could mean having to let go of something. And this might be a perspective or an inner story or a belief, or letting go of something that is unattainable. Or it could also be about someone. Okay. So, maybe there's a relationship that's lingering. I mean, these nodes are Mars and Venus after all. And even though these are the, the 6th and the 12th houses, and you wouldn't necessarily consider them to be relational houses, but we do have Mars and Venus in them. So this might be tensions or traumas within a relationship. Is it more work than what it's worth? Or is there something not right with the relationship, but you don't know what that problem is? And so just thinking back to, these two cycles in my own life is, the 2003, 2004, that eclipse cycle, which is the same repetitive cycle of what we got now. I remember breaking, I sort of started to study astrology, and at the same time, I ended a relationship, which was the one that kind of, I guess, really kind of, I don't know if I want to say, like, it was the one that did me some damage, if you like. Like, you know, I felt like I was a cat landing on my feet up until that point, but that one did sort of cut a little bit deeper and also made me aware of some elements or dynamics that I hadn't experienced in relationships before. So it was a lot more contemplative, private, intense. It wasn't just this mutual decision to part ways. It was more difficult for me, in want of a better word. Then in September 2012, 2014, that was also a very dynamic period within relationships. You know, I had I had escaped a relationship that was violent, that had become violent. So the first time that happened was the last time. So it was like that was done, and, you know, no ongoing situations there. And then I'd moved up to Brisbane. So I sort of had to literally kind of escape. And then, yeah, you know, almost a year later, I met somebody else, and that was my baby's father. So, you know, and I also realized fairly early on in that situation that it wasn't going to be a permanent thing. So, you know, it was a very, you know, again, it was like difficulty, but also the depth of learning about the houses in your birth chart that you don't see, that don't support you. So it can illuminate those background themes, but in a situation that's right in front of you. So it's a really interesting dynamic there. So I just thought I would, you know, do the tour of the houses, give you some food for thought of what's going to be coming up in the next 18 months. So I'd love to hear any sort of eclipse stories from the previous cycles, or what you can already maybe see starting to play out, particularly too, because we've already had that introductory eclipse in November of 2021. Alrighty then. Well, thanks for watching this. I hope you found it useful. I've enjoyed exploring these houses with you. Until next time, I look forward to seeing you then.